Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to be here among these speakers. I'm foremost happy to have my voice back since 2 days. So I think it's very good that I come at this stage because then it's much easier to relate to the previous speakers and kind of adapt a bit my approach. So I think what I'll do is I'll take on my practitioner hat on me, and I try to take you through a journey, kind of systematic journey. Right? I called it this silent driven transformation because I think this is coming very strongly, and maybe it's not as apparent, or maybe some people may think they don't need to care about it, but you'll see through my talk why it would be nice to actually get engaged in this. So I'm from Sweden. I spent my whole life in Sweden. It's quite similar to Singapore because two small countries, very ambitious, knowledge societies where developing people, lifelong learning is quite essential. Another good thing for me coming from Sweden is, you see through my talk, is IKEA thinking is very important. It's because we in Sweden, it's very important to actually be able to deconstruct your tools, to be able to build them, understand them in pieces, but together they should make a whole. But at the same time, it should be scalable. You should be able to sell it to everyone. And everyone should feel my table is quite nice, it's mine. So that's the drawback of, I think for me, it's very essential to go and have a holistic perspective. So I start. But at the same time, during my talk, I've been inspired by my time here. I've been here for 5 months through the LKC medicine. Also, I've been working with an organization in the US called Ubiquitous for almost 10 years. They've been working on educational standards. And the thing about them is that these are bottom-up developed, so they are from practitioners as opposed to technology developed. And it has been shown that they are actually used quite heavily because of that, because they come up from the organization. So we've heard a lot of outstanding researchers. There's no way I can match them. So my tactics is to take an institutional approach, a holistic approach. And before I moved here, I was the director of a center at Karolinska for learning and knowledge. What you learn being a director of such a center is that it doesn't matter what you do if it doesn't impact the whole organization. But at the same time, of course, you cannot deploy anything without systematically going through all these pieces. So in these centers, we had everything. We have educationalists, we have people, technology developers, innovation, we have evaluation units, statistics units, we have the front-end support to have things implemented. We were in charge of the learning spaces. And that was very, actually, good experience. I will try to tell a story for 35 minutes, and the only way to do that is to have a very few main topics. So I will start by learning analytics and twist it a bit, and then give you our story, how we started the journey, because it can be quite inspiring to see when you start from zero and you keep going. One possible example how we did, and then I think 3 slides about the choices that I think are very strategically important to make. Then every context is unique and it can be used differently. So for the learning analytics, I use the same definition as you because there are new definitions, but this one it keeps sticking because it's simple. You understand that it's about measuring, collecting, but also the purpose of it is understanding, optimizing learning in a way. But if you are new to this, you might stand up with some kind of other terms that are floating around, and they actually are not mutually exclusive, but they are used by different type of communities to emphasize some part of learning analytics. If you're absolutely new to this, I would recommend to go to this site, Educo site. They have a quick ramp up, very simple to understand about learning analytics from institutional aspects down. So they have quite nice guides. Don't you think so? It's simple. It's a very nice way to get on board, because very often the issue is that people are not onboarded, which means that there is a big distance between people in the learning analytics and people outside observing this as some kind of interesting phenomenon. So my background is in medicine, but then I did my PhD in education informatics, and then later on a lot of education. So in healthcare, you want to deconstruct things, right? Symptoms or bodies or things. So I've tried to take this term and then just split it into two, because we have a tendency to forget that there is learning in analytics. So I start with analytics, and please bear with me if it's oversimplified. I'm just trying to make a case. So this is something that everyone usually recognizes, right? It's the Baker's knowledge continuum. Doesn't matter, but this is. So I try to do like, okay, if we put analytics to it, what does it mean? Analytics itself, it just means you capture, report, you predict, you act, and refine. And if you move to the next level and you make it learn analytics, what is the difference? And that very often people don't see the difference. The difference is when you start to ask questions. You start to ask, how am I doing? How will I do? How can I do better? That's for me learning analytics as opposed to analytics. So we need to be clear about where you are in your discussion when you talk about learning analytics. Then this slide, it's not mine, I borrowed it, is that once you have this clear for you, you have to stand, it's a sea of levels. And that a lot of people are still stuck in this descriptive learning analytics when what has happened, I mean, they try, and it's a very good start, but I would say the ambition should be to get all the way to prescriptive, which means that diagnostic, what will happen next, predictive, what will happen, and then prescriptive, what should I do about it? So if you try to work yourself mentally, and thinking that should be the goal, otherwise you back to very simple descriptive statistics, and that you're not leveraging really enough the field. Which means that the deeper you go, of course, it becomes more complex. You need to constantly collect data. You need to actually work much more. But that should be the ambition to achieve this, because then you can fully utilize the data-driven thinking in this aspect. Then we go to the other side. We go to the learning. The reason why I want to bring this up, must be super simple for you, is because if we don't keep this in the equation, then analytics takes over. It drives the whole movement. What is learning for us in medicine is very simple. It's knowledge, skills, and attitude. You find it in every, from K to F up. You just at each part of the educational continuum, try to make sense of it. In our field, the way we make sense of it is that we have knowledge, skills, and attitude. We talk about progression from novice to expert, and we talk about different levels that we can somehow get some data point from. That will help us. But so we want to help people to progress. And that's something I discovered when I moved here, is that you have to be aware there is the balance between performance and mastery is quite different from country to country and systems to systems. In Sweden, at least in K-12, there's an awful emphasis on mastery. For example, they get their first grades quite late in, actually. While here, it's emphasis on performance, even if there's a strong movement toward mastery. So you have to think that these two will be addressed differently in learning analytics. Of course, if the idea is to support mastery as opposed to performance, then you have to think differently. This is medicine. But if you take this back, and we go back to what we all know, constructive alignments, right? We deconstruct learning and look at it, how will the people learn? What do they need to know? How we will know that they have learned? This needs to stay in the equation, because otherwise you have a lot of data, but you don't really identify what aspect you're addressing. The second is another one to show you that even on the learning side, there are a lot of existing models that could be used in learning analytics that also already now shows the relationship between this complex educational environment we all have. You cannot just pick one and you think that this is some causality effect. Once you touch something, it has an effect on something else. So using all the knowledge we know about learning science, about the theories, it would be a strong contribution to analytics. That's why I think you need to engage more in this community. This is another one, because I heard about the interest to academic achievement and elements that we can measure. It's the same thing. Is if you know where you're moving, what type of data you have, what are you trying to achieve, you can bring on board your knowledge about learning, and you can then start to look at data in quite a different way. Second is application. I've laid out as a story, as opposed to, so if you are interested in papers, we publish almost 15 papers on the topic, so I can share with you. So I won't run the studies. What I will run is the learning from it, okay? So almost chronological, where we started, and to show you that there is always a journey, and each one needs to do the journey. There's no, someone said, you cannot take a model and take it over, but you need to do the journey. Our journey started this way. We were looking up, where is the data? We found a lot of data on learning management platform. We found a lot of assessment data. That's a low-hanging fruit. Why go further? So we started to do visualization to show the different teaching strategies, the different methods. We were looking at gaps in learning objectives, starting to use it as some kind of planning analytics for teachers, for curriculum designers, even later on for students to see the different topics. That's how we started, very simple. I mean, this is something, I would say, descriptive learning analytics. Then we moved on and started to match it to knowledge, skill, and attitude domains, and start to see, because this was then used as a quality improvement process for teachers to actually visualize so that's our first journey. And then we start to match to assessment and see the performance of the students in relation to learning objectives as opposed to an exam. So we start to open up slowly so sense-making of the data, in a sense that we not want to understand if they performed well. We want to understand what aspect they performed well and less well. Is it because the way the course is designed? Is it because of the student? Is it because of the learning environment? So that informs back, it gets value back to us. Where should we work on? But that's still very simple. Then we managed to publish in PLOS ONE. For this topic was interesting. Is that then you start to move in the ladder of learning analytics. Then we start to have a live visualization of the curriculum. People can make changes and see relationships. And then it becomes almost prescriptive. People can simulate changes and see how the different topics are. Sometimes we discover some are completely disconnected. So that's something you can read about in the publication. So that was our first round we were very excited, but I think we approached it as practitioners. Then we start to think, what are we really doing? What are we doing? Are we doing academic analytics, or are we doing learning analytics? And then you discover that there is no clear distinction, because there are different types of analytics. A lot of things you read about, for me, academic analytics. So it's coming from institution, existing data. It's not really forming the learning at individual level, but it's very valuable. So we start to think, okay, how do we move down to, because in medicine, healthcare, you want to provide value to the person, being a student or being a patient, or you want to give them feedback, you want to give them a room for reflection so they can improve. They don't care if the course itself has lower quality. They care about where I am, how can I progress. So that's why then we started to do our journey toward, we discovered too, as a lot of the discourse is coming from here. So it's data-driven. So data is there, and then you start to push it out to make sense of it, right? So what we've done is that we've reversed our approach, and we start to be what we call context and needs-driven. Sorry. So we said, we won't move on this unless we know what we want to achieve. We won't move on this unless we know what the value is for each aspect. Once we know this, then we take the journey back to the data. And if there is no data, we'll ensure that we get it. Because if we get it, it will have a strong value. So that's what we spent a lot of time on this and published on this and tested different forms of, and that's actually quite different. So I would say that we do data-enabled. It's not data-driven. It's data-enabled. So when the mindset changes, then you can include a lot of different type of stakeholders because people know exactly what the value is. But if the data, if we spend a lot of time, and I say there's a lot of good research we can build on. So this is not excluding this research, it's just that we decide to fill up from the other side. And there are a lot of research, extensively good research on massaging data, acquiring data, and that keeps coming, new type of data. We felt our contribution should be the other way around, so we have ultimately an ecosystem that provides full value. One example I can give you from our field, more complex, it's beyond recall or knowledge or this like that, is something that's important for us is diagnostic reasoning. And if you know problem solving, or all these aspects that you listed, these are very complex constructs. You cannot just go to them directly and say, oh, he's more creative. You have to deconstruct it, and there are a lot of different models. What we've done is that we know that there are theories of how to reason. We know that they are, we know them. In most medical schools, we know that people use interactive cases or virtual patients, okay? But what people don't know is if we collect data from each of these nodes, what does it mean? So they provide, and then they have often post-assessment. So they use it as a black box. So they say, okay, the more you train, of course, the more you learn. But if you have a learning analytics perspective, it doesn't work because you want to be able to provide them meaningful feedback, reflection at a very defined level. They want to know not if it went well, is that what went well, less well, why, what can I improve? So what we've done, those are happy for the, is you cannot, of course, go to your educational context and experiment. That would be like ethically interesting. What we've done is that we were also at edX, I was coordinator of edX. We embedded the learning activities and assessment we were interested to explore in edX. We created a course called, you remember, it's behavioral medicine. And we took those in, and then we had them run through 40,000 participants. So this is a new way of thinking, is that you can find out which data is important, what does it mean, outside. And then once it's validated, you put it back into your educational context. So what we did, we had 40,000, but only 20,000 run this, several virtual patients, and then we were able to characterize each, if it was a clinician, medical student, allied health, etc., what their background, which year, which means that we ended up reverse engineering the whole case, but knowing exactly what they were doing in each, the level of progression. So one way of working from needs-driven is that you can actually do experiments to validate this and know exactly, which means that then learning analytics is the next step. You can implement it and it can run. Because once you know it, you can have the student run and you can have it automatically done. That was very interesting finding, actually. Another one example, we moved forward. So we did a lot of this, embedding in different contexts, trying to use the learning theories, the different theories, and then we collect data, and then we model it, like someone said, so we know what each point. Another one is we will always have new technologies coming in. I think learning analytics have a strong value in the context of blended learning. We need to always think that it's a blended learning approach, not only online. So we tested, like, what happens if new learning activities, new technologies comes in? Can we do something more about it? Because in the previous one, we already had them in place. So imagine you have something already in place, and you want to sense-making data. But there's another scenario, is that Singapore being very innovative, is that new things will keep coming in. So how can we be even more proactive and validate those before they even? So this is an example in medicine. It's very hot. Augmented reality is you want to keep the context, and you want to add on it a lot of data, learning activities, assessment. So this is like you can look at a patient, you get. So what we've done is that we took one step back, and then we start to look at the design of this activity itself. So try to keep simple. What we've done is that we created models. We deconstructed this augmented reality into, we're putting it, designing in learning points, data points, And then we provide them to the designers of the learning activities, developers, and guide them. So when they create this, we know exactly which aspects they have been using, which means that what we get is suddenly no need to validate because we get the learning activity and its anatomy at the same time. And I'm just talking from learning analytics. So from learning analytics, we get the data point, we get the intentions, the learning intentions, we get the design, we get why, what type of, what was the aim of the event, which is that we tried this. It's very interesting because then you can open the door for innovation coming in, but what you get in is not only the product, not only the sale pitch, not only the learning design activity. We get is the inner works of it that is of value for learning analytics, not just like a nice pamphlet. But you need to help people with that. And that, I think, is applicable especially for emerging technologies, where there's lack of it. The third one we've done is that we envision, we are sure, is that we cannot have all the data. It's not possible. This idea that just by looking at course logins on LMS at our institution doesn't mean anything. It's just like they go down. So if we envision that we will live with both formal and informal learning environments, okay, so we've been doing a lot of work actually to enrich the formal learning environment, finding ways to pick up, to enrich the learner's profile from whatever they do outside of institution. So this is the example of MOOC, can be social media, can be they maybe outside doing seminar. So we can start to provide ways to acquire only the data that we need to enrich the profile, which means that then in a formal learning setting, it can be in healthcare or in a university, we know more about Nabil, that Nabil is not only doing what I'm giving them to do, but they actually explore maybe MOOCs, they explore social media, they're on a website. I don't want to know what they're doing. I just want to know what they benefited from, what their learning was, so I can provide a more personalized. I think that's going to be the future, not to try to track everything, but to enrich the profile. Next is back to our home base. I think a lot of things, this is landing, is I think that we are now ready to put it more full scale. And I think LKC Medicine is really good context. I'm looking at Paul. Is looking to wrap it up. So we can actually, there's, for example, at LKC Medicine, it's a typical innovative blended learning approach. There's so much data that is already collected that the condition to move to actually properly use learning analytics advanced is there. So that's something we're working upon, that we are now putting all this idea to make it actually full-scale test bed. It will take a few years to actually finally have an analytics that is embedded, that is helping the students through their mastery, through their performance, giving them feedback, personalized feedback, pushing them to reflection, helping them to be more self-learners, self-directed learners in different ways. I can say more because the project have. So I think that if you come back to maybe LKC 2 years from now, you might be able to see a full-scale functioning learning analytics that is more needs-driven. Then the choices. Those are just personal. There are a few choices I think are very critical currently in this learning aspect. The first one is, this actually borrowed from one of my friends from CMU, is that what we're doing is we're making the learning something you can observe. So we're trying to express it, actually. And you do it by playing with interplay between model and practice. So that's actually what we're doing, oversimplified. So you have to remember that. That should be the goal. The second is one of my things, is data is the new oil. No, data is the new oil. In every developed countries, data is the new oil. And that's the silent transformation, is that whatever we like it or not, more and more data is available. People cannot make sense of it, but there's more and more data. With Internet of Things, we'll be able to scan the environments. People are more and more willing to give up some of their well-being status. There's a lot of research on neuroscience, skin conductance, so we get in there. It's just a question of time. There's a lot of research. But then if you don't see it as your oil, you may want to give it away. Because once you give it away, that's it. So there is a strategic discussion in terms of if you see this as valuable data itself, if you feel it's possible to actually provide value from it, you should think about when your pipeline ends and when other people's pipelines end. And so there is a large range of decisions being made. Either you pump your oil to a vendor or you do everything yourself. I think it's somewhere in between. But it needs to have people understanding of this needs to be much higher. People need to understand they have something to commit to this and don't give up to the easy way of just pumping in your oil somewhere else because there's no way back. There's no way back. The value in learning analytics doesn't lie in the data. The value lies in the sense-making process. The value lies in you making the call of what is of value. That's where it is. The data doesn't make any sense. Data is collecting, you can collect. But if you are owning the data, it's very important to also understand how to harness it. The third one is more long-term. If you implicitly, what people are talking about is a choice to make. It's not black and white again. Are you looking at this as a way to augment capacity of your learners, of your teachers, decision makers? Or do we envision that we arrive to a place where AI is driving the things and you're just like supportive? And there's a big debate around this because ultimately that has some strategic choices in where to push. Because if you, I think it's also again a continuum of different cases, but that's one of the silent transformation is the more we harness data, the more we make sense of it, the more we get in the computer, we get in there ultimately where we would maybe, this will have impact on the way education is designed or who provides education. And so that's very silent, but that's something to think about. And maybe for you to explore, read more about this AI, this thing. Thank you for your time. My voice can't hold more than 27 minutes, so I've just finished up. Any questions?
Nabil just recovered from a very serious flu and lung infection. Right? Yeah. So any questions regarding, Nabil's presentation?
Any feedback, comments?
Yeah.
Welcome feedback. Do you all agree, disagree? Any ideas? Or did it make sense? Did it make sense? Yeah?
So I this might not be a fair question because
yes.
You might not have slides for this, but we were talking earlier and you had mentioned the connection between learning analytics and analytics in a medical context.
Yes.
And well, of course, from a patient standpoint, I see how the world is moving towards lots more data collection.
Yes.
And everything online
yes.
in terms of medical practices. And I'm wondering, where do you see, how different is it in terms of the broader issues?
Yeah.
So obviously at the level of algorithms and, trying to build models and doing prediction, across fields, it can be all very similar. But what do you see in terms of how the world is moving? What are the similarities and differences between those two different worlds that you're part of?
Let's say the medicine and healthcare has always been a lot outcome oriented. So, there's building processes. We can call them patient safety, quality of care. We want to have people that are capable of providing good care. So it's actually an easy space to move in. But the next step, I think the big value will be that we need to continue. It's a continuous effort in workforce development. It's currently, that's a big space for the, so currently there is a good work in CP, is continuous professional development, seminars, that is going to grow and be really good and personalized. Then there is other side, so this is the other side is when there are errors, this could provide a value in terms of not just stigmatizing errors, but rather providing the right, not remediation, the right support in covering the lack. But then the patients, that's I think a very interesting aspect because they are citizens. It's we, right? It's just that when they need healthcare, they seem to be very open to this quantified self movement, which is they are willing to give away the data. I would like to discuss, create awareness about the application of such venture, because what we have is that the more data, the more we can move on the prevention side, for example. But the role of the healthcare will become quite different. So I think we see that in the digital natives, their willingness to open data is very interesting. That's why we need to match it up with proper use of the data, so it has value to them, as opposed to just pumping the data. So I don't know if I'm answering this question, but it's a very, very intensively developing field because it has a clear idea about we call value-based care, value-based education. We're there already, but we need to come up with solutions to actually highlight this value.
So actually, as a follow-up question, I see a really exciting opportunity here then, especially for someone whose feet span both areas of analytics. And it has to do with the idea of analytics to support the transition of learning in a formal context into continued professional development beyond. So, so you mentioned that analytics in the medical field is more about the continuing professional development of doctors, at least on one stream. And it seems to me that the learning analytics has mostly kind of given up on students in a way. By the time they finish their formal education and move into the workplace. How can we bridge these two worlds?
I think that is going to disappear, at least in Singapore. I think in Singapore, if we do it properly, the undergrad is just a journey. Residency, I mean, on the initial side, they're very good at residency training. It's just about overbridging this progression. Also, I haven't mentioned, we did study in another country where we already linked up the antibiotic prescription habits and feedback to their CME. So it's given to the people that really need that. And that's the only way to scale, because we cannot provide all training to everyone. We need to customize it. And I guess that could be translated to K-12 too, because Singapore is very good at personalizing different tracks. Their learning analytics can be just perfect, because you have a system in place that is open for personalization, for different tracks, different speeds. Then you have to just go in for it. But you have to do it in a way that it provides added value to the current system.
Yeah, I have so many comments. I don't know what to do with it. I think it can be personalized. We're so good at, Singapore's so good at personalizing, and I'm saying this in the midst of my MOE colleagues, and I love MOE. No, but I'm just saying personalization, the flip side of that is prescription. And we could be perfect, but we could be perfectly wrong as well. So I think that's very important, which brings us back to that always being very cautious and very critical about our predictive modeling. So we could be perfect, but we could be perfectly wrong. I think that's something that just occurred to me. But you're right. It's a. Anyone else? We had a colleague. Oh, and I also wanted to ask our MOE colleagues whether you had a response to that, about that transition, and how do we optimize the power of analytics, especially if it's based on very strong learning designs and principles and validation of strong learning designs to optimize learning. How can we bridge that transition? And Nabil is of the, he has the opinion that it could be very well structured here, especially with our Future Skills program, being part of the Ministry of Education as well. It would be great to hear our ministry colleagues respond to that too.
Hi, I'm Jennifer and I'm from MOE, but I'm not going to respond to what you just asked. No. I just want to say thank you very much for a very crystal clear presentation. It has made me understand a lot more about what learning analytics is all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can you parachute to the top of Mount Everest? So if I'm going through this, you have descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive, which means you have a lot of data, then you figure out what to do with a lot of data. Then you start building models with that stuff that you know what the data is about, and then you start issuing prescriptions. Is there a way to start at the top?
Yes, you can. For some aspects, you can. But it's just that what I was trying to pursue is the way to validate such. I mean, I've tried to make a case. Some things are low-hanging fruit. It's more of a, so it's a spread of what is mature for implementation, what is still needs to be verified, what is still just a great idea. And in some aspects, I would say it's possible. So you don't need to go, it's not a sequential idea of thinking.
So what would be a case where you could start with the prescription without knowing?
I'll give you an example of when the stakes are all known, the physician, the GP is overprescribing antibiotics, and we have data about their actual behavior, and we have actually something to offer and we can follow up then later on if there's a change of behavior. So you already have stakes in place. Then you can jump. But if you don't have that, that's what my case was, is to deconstruct, take it easy, but don't forget that you need to put all stakeholders in the game. And you have to balance learning analytics. And I haven't talked about the data and machine learning because for me that's the easiest part of it. Is the other ones needs to strengthen their game. Because then you have something everyone is understanding, so you have something that is solid because it's owned by everyone. But if one part is strong and pushing, then we get this type of questions of that shows a lack of understanding or lack of engagement, which I think everyone should be engaged in this. No one should be standing outside and pointing at the one that actually do a lot of work for us. You have to come in. And I think that community needs to be strengthened from these two perspectives.
Anyone else with any thoughts? It also occurred to me who owns the data, who owns the oil. And and that also is very provocative, so thank you.
I'm trying to provoke at the end, but it doesn't mean I'm right. I just say these are the key we keep forgetting in this big mess.
Absolutely, and it occurred to me that perhaps we think we own the data wherever we are, but actually the oil is owned by, who owns the oil? That's the question. And I would lean on the side of the students and the learners owning the oil and what we push back to them through the end of this process. I mean, it was just, maybe I'm understanding that analogy wrong, but
I brought it proposed because that's strong AR innovation for Singapore.
Yeah, no, it's great.
That is very, very strong potential.
Yeah,
for innovation and growth. That's why I brought it up. Think about the oil once you open the pipeline. No going back.
Absolutely. So thank you very much. Can you join me in thanking?